This week on Waxing the Porpoise, G-Baby and the usual suspect Steve take it regional and turn their sights on a series of brutal killings perpetrated close to our hometown, focusing on the greater Sacramento area circa the late 1970s to revisit Richard Chase, otherwise known as the Vampire of Sacramento, so named due to his predilection for and disturbing obsession with blood. Join us as we discuss Chase's background and relative lack of name recognition comparative to more well-known and notorious serial killers, the geographical connection between Chase and the Golden State Killer, aka the East Area Rapist and original Night Stalker, explore the age-old nature-nurture debate, and lastly speculate on the potential prosecution tactics we're actually seeing now relating to lack of parental intervention and the interpretations relating to the criminal liability of parents as we move into the future. The porpoises, midnight companions and keen observers, steel ourselves once more to examine one of the most depraved figures in California history and hold on to the hope for some kind of retribution in the next life. Fuck Patton Oswalt. Let's wax this sanguine porpoise.
Chase, don't do that.
You see, we working on his brow chakra. We're just in back at the crown chakra.
All right, welcome to Waxing the Porpoise, the podcast where we dive deep into the dark and uncharted waters of film, high strangeness, and everything in between. This evening, you've been cordially invited to join us on this episode 91, where this time we're downshifting and we'll be discussing an actual true crime case this time, the infamous Vampire of Sacramento, Richard Chase. Tonight, you've got myself, Jim G. Baby.
And now, after all this time, I finally figured out a way to trap him. I will become him.
And, of course, we have the usual suspect, Steve.
Listen, you sick sack of swill.
How's it going, man?
Doing good. How you doing?
Good. Do you recognize that bump I used for you?
Yeah, but I can't place it.
I used to say it all the time.
Yeah.
Like, because of my autistic echolalia affliction. It's from Airheads. It's that SWAT guy.
Oh, yeah.
Played by Marshall Bell.
Yeah.
When he gets on the phone and he doesn't realize, he thinks he's talking to like the metalheads, but it's Michael Richards in the fucking air vent and shit. He's like, "You sick sack of swell, you touch one hair." And he's like, hello, I'm trapped in. He's like, "Oh, okay, you're going to be my man on the inside." And then later on, he talks about this one skid mark and 16 years of marriage, and now I'm living in a condo.
Well, that's an appropriate bump for this one because this is one sick pup.
Yeah, we were just talking off mic before this. I didn't realize how fucking depraved this dude was, and the severity of the killings may be one of the reasons that you don't hear about him as much. I mean, people in the true crime world and like people that are really into this is like, you know, he's like a heavy hitter kind of character. But I think just in general, if you said Richard Chase, you know, it doesn't pop like, you know, people are so recognizable with like Ted Bundy or you know, the Boston Strangler or things, people like that, you know, so.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't have the same sort of name recognition.
Even though the Vampire of Sacramento is pretty gaudy.
It is.
Moniker and fitting, really. I mean, I feel like some of those they were trying to reach for sensationalism when this one kind of hits the nail on the head.
Yeah, if anything, it sort of understates how sick he was. Like,
yeah,
because I grew up in Sacramento, and I had like a vague knowledge of this guy because I grew up there in the late 80s, early 90s, so this was well past his reign of terror. But, you know, I was somewhat aware of his existence, and then sometime in the last few years, I know that I listened to a podcast about him And even that, I was like, all right, it doesn't really sound that spectacular or anything. But then when we started looking into it for this episode, I was like, this is one of the sickest human beings I've ever heard about.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure nobody listening gives a shit, but geographically, I thought it was interesting because this guy is such a sick fuck. Another serial killer who came out of Sacramento is his name's Joseph D'Angelo, also known as the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, the Diamond Knot Killer, and most famously the Golden State Killer. And so both of those guys, it's funny, if you look up both of their addresses, where I grew up was almost exactly halfway in between the two in like the suburbs of Sacramento. So I just thought that was a cool little thing for me personally. But yeah, both of those guys are absolute sickos. If you don't know the story of the Golden State Killer, you definitely should look him up. 50 plus rapes, 12 murders, and he is a sick bitch. He would like break into people's houses before he would attack them and leave like ligatures in there. So when he attacked him, he would like reach under a couch and he already had shit prepped. And he would also like call these women years later and just like breathe over the phone. Yeah, sick fuck.
Yeah, that'd be brutal, man, to have the trauma and always looking over your shoulder kind of thing going on, but then to actually have it validated by someone fucking around with you too, like those kind of fears. God, that's got to be such a fucked way to live.
Yeah, and it took him like that 40 years to catch the guy.
Because people thought it was two different people, and then it converged and was like, oh, this is the one dude who had been doing all of this shit. It was called Ear Ons. What was the ONS?
Original Night Stalker. Original Night Stalker. Yeah, so he graduated from like prowling and burglary in the Bay Area to serial raping in the Sacramento area. Then he moved down to Southern California, and that's when the murder started. But then he just stopped for 30 years or something, and people just assumed he died or got arrested for something else. But then doing that genetic genealogy, I think he was probably the first most high-profile case of the genetic genealogy. They just found him living in Sacramento, old man.
Yeah, didn't it? He started. He ramped up, and didn't he go by? Wasn't he the Visalia ransacker or the something ransacker first?
No, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Damn. Yeah, I remember I caught pieces of that documentary. I can't remember what the fuck it's called. The HBO did, like, I Am Gone in the Light or I'm Gone in the Dark or something.
Yeah, I think it's called I'll Be Gone in the Dark. So Patton Oswalt's wife, the one that he allegedly murdered, wrote a book about it before she was murdered by him, for sure. Definitely not allegedly.
Dude, Patton Oswalt, I don't like that motherfucker. I really
Why?
don't.
Just because he murdered his wife and was remarried like 3 months later?
I don't want to say I called this at all, but I did have like a weird feeling. There's something about him that just kind of rubbed me the wrong way before that. Yeah. And then like seeing, even in that documentary, like he's in it, and like some of the interviews and stuff before and after she died while investigating this case and stuff, like just the way he carried himself, that just feels weird. Like there's something off. And then like the circumstances of his wife dying and all that stuff, and how quick he re-upped to some gal way out of his league, like super fast. Yeah,
well, and then he put out her book, and I think he's benefiting financially. Anyway, there's also a really good, if anybody's listened to the Case File podcast, there's like a 4 or 5 parter about the East Area Rapist. It's super good, worth a listen. That's where I first heard about the guy.
Is Case File the dude that's hyper Australian?
Yes, very Australian.
Okay. Just wanted to be clear.
It rules.
Yeah. So, do you mind me asking whereabouts, like what region in Sacramento? Where you were talking about these guys lived you were halfway in between. Like what kind of region are we talking?
If we're going to get hyper local, I grew up in Citrus Heights, which is sort of northeast of Sacramento proper. D'Angelo grew up also in Citrus Heights, just further northeast. This gentleman, Richard Chase, or Rick, I don't know where he lived with his mom, but when he moved out to his apartment prior to the killing spree, it was southwest of me in the sort of Arden area.
Probably Arden Arcade.
No, even though I know you love that. Or no, sorry, Watt Avenue. So south of, let's see, I guess it would be south of 80, north of 50 for those who are really loving the regional talk. Next to
like
Del Monte Country Club for any golfers out there. Really, really exciting stuff. But yeah, pretty nuts to have two of like the sickest motherfuckers I can think of in the same little town.
Yeah, that's trippy. Totally.
Yeah. So anyway, just to get in a little bit of his background, dude, this guy is such a sick fuck. I could not believe the stuff that I was reading about him. So he was born in 1950. Early in life, he's got the holy trifecta of this dude's going to be a fucking problem in the future. He's
I made a note of that. That's the McDonald triad. I hadn't heard that before, but I've heard this assemblage of shit that they look for. It didn't sound super scientific to me.
No, I think it's one of those things where looking backward, it's like, oh, well, yeah, all of these people had this in common, but I don't think it works the exact same way looking into the future.
Right.
I think it should be a cause of concern if you have a kid who's exhibiting signs of being cruel to animals.
Yeah, just in general, like that's fucked up. You want to deal with it.
Yeah, the animals thing is the worst thing for me. The other one is setting fires. I mean, everybody where I grew up as a kid would set fires. And then persistent bedwetting past the age of 5. So cruelty to animals, pyromania, persistent bedwetting, aka Jim's childhood. Those are all apparently signs of things to come.
Well, also, I know the bedwetting, especially as it graduates to like later years where it's like, hey, this is a phase that we should have come out of. I've heard that that's related to like sexual abuse and trauma as well. So
I could see
apropos
that.
of nothing, but yeah, I mean that just between that and the animal cruelty it should be cause for alarm. And I think as we get going, one of the things that struck me was like, maybe it's just part of the times and this shit was so like new, but it seems like the parents, not to like always shit on the parents and blame them, but I feel like they could have been more present, or there could have been more that they could have done to intercede.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And there's also, a spectrum of cruelty to animals where if you're a kid with like a magnifying glass on an anthill, that's one thing versus somebody who's like gutting a cat and eating its entrails. And, there's quite a chasm between those two things. Or, because back in these days, I feel like it was also common to put like a fucking M80 in a frog's mouth, which it's pretty sick, chubs, but it's not the same. So, and he also started doing like LSD at a really young age, which that can just send you down a road you're not coming back from. So,
right.
He may have had some of the prerequisites for psychopathy, but I think he took some extracurriculars in the drug department, which Go ahead.
I was just going to say this could be like an example of like nature nurture. It was like he hit money both ways, like the predisposition and then these external factors around him and like down to the drugs he was ingesting. I mean, I've heard it speculated too that could have like triggered some kind of like schizophrenic reaction or put him on that path. So then he's like, has these inclinations and then he's also not thinking right, and able to distinguish like reality and right from wrong, which is interesting later because we'll get there. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
So then even from a young age he started developing these weird hypochondriac tendencies where I'm sure you saw some of these, but I was reading other articles and a few of them would just sprinkle in other little things that I hadn't read where like, I think some of the most famous ones were he said that he felt like his heart would just stop beating from time to time. He thought somebody had stolen his pulmonary artery. One interesting other one I read is he thought that his stomach was in backwards.
Yeah, that was a really weird detail too. It's like, God, what must that feel like for you to think that, just like you're just twisted up in knots?
Yeah, he thought he was low on vitamin C, so as anyone would, he decided that holding oranges to his head would be the best way to alleviate that particular malady.
On my head?
Yeah, nice. They're going to drop you on somebody else's head? Yeah, he thought his skull was fractured and moving around like tectonic plates. So, of course, to monitor that, you would shave your head and just keep a really close eye on it. And he also thought his blood was being turned to powder, which we find out more later that he thought the blood being turned to powder was because of Nazi UFOs, which, I'm not saying I believe him, but I don't disbelieve him. Yeah, so
when you stack all these things up, man, it's pretty sizable, like the amount of shit that he's kind of navigating through here.
It's not a red flag. It's like the fucking Olympics of red flags,
right.
And so, yeah, even as a kid, he's capturing and killing animals, eating them raw, or for a little extra spice, he would put them in a blender with like a soda and make a little raw animal organ float smoothie deal.
Blood Julius.
Yeah, nice. So this might come as a shock to somebody who's listening, but he actually spent a brief amount of time in a psychiatric ward in 1973. So one other weird thing about him in particular is his entire reign of terror occurred over less than 1 month. So the dates are going to become somewhat important soon. So he was born in 1950.
Yeah, that was one thing that really jumped out was like, holy shit, man. I figured like someone with this kind of a name and like where he's at in the pantheon of serial killers, that the duration would have been at least like a year. But to learn it's like, month and a half, like, fuck.
He burned bright and he burned hot for a very short amount of time. So, again, he was born in 50. To just give a little bit of a spoiler, actually, I'm not even going to give that spoiler away. So, he spent a little bit of time in a psychiatric ward in 1973, so he's 23. Couldn't find a ton of detail about that. Skipping ahead to 1976, when he's either 25 or 26, depending on when his birthday is. He was involuntarily committed to a mental institution when he was taken to a hospital with blood poisoning because he had injected himself with a rabbit's blood.
It's fucking brutal.
So, yeah,
and he had this weird like thing about blood. Like he thought that it was being like stolen, or he was being deprived, and he was in a constant, and later on that's why the vampire moniker attached so easily. But yeah, I didn't know that either, that he had all these really weird idiosyncratic like fears, and like you can only imagine how dropping acid would just fucking like dumping kerosene on a fire on all this.
Right. Yeah. Well, like you said, he had this weird fixation that his blood was being turned to powder, so he had to replenish it with animal blood and organs. And I think after a while that just didn't become enough. So, yeah, the staff at this psych ward or mental institution or whatever nicknamed him Dracula because, well, obviously. And I looked up this like miniature, I wouldn't even call it a documentary, because I was trying to look up footage from his trial because I saw that they had video cameras there. And so it's funny, it actually looked like this little 20-minute vignette was put out by like the Sacramento Tourism Board, which is like a very weird thing for them to put out.
Yeah.
And they were interviewing a guy who worked at the psych hospital, and he was like, yeah, we knew this guy was like a fucking problem, but I mean, we had to discharge him because they could only hold him for 72 hours or whatever. And he's like, also the walls around the facility were only about like 5 feet tall, and we knew that the patients were sneaking out at night, hopping the fence, and just doing whatever they wanted at night. As long as they came back before dawn, there was nothing we could really do about it, which is frightening to think about.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
And so I don't know if you saw that during his stay with the folks at that facility, they would occasionally see him like with blood all over his face, and he's like, cut myself shaving.
Oh my God. I definitely wasn't eating a cat.
Yeah. No, it seems like, or it sounds like what happened was they saw that he had caught a couple birds who flew in through the window. You break their neck and you drink their blood, of course. Yeah, and imagine having like blood around your mouth like a Kool-Aid mustache and be like, cut myself shaving.
Yeah, your entire head?
Yeah.
Dude.
I saw one thing that also said that there were therapy dogs on site that he was able to extract blood from with stolen syringes and,
Jesus.
either drink it or I don't think he shot himself up with that because, and I meant to look this up, but like what the fuck would happen to your body injecting animal blood?
Well, isn't that what one of the instances he had blood poisoning because he injected the rabbit's blood into his veins?
Well, yeah, but that's what it said, but I don't know what that actually means, like how that presents itself. Yeah, I don't know. I meant to
read
look
that
further.
he had become like super ill and like was really fucked up, and his parents are involved in kind of like handling him and taking him to his grandmother, I think, and back and forth during this time, like throughout the early 70s, mid 70s. So that's how it presented, like he was like deathly ill, like someone who had gone septic or something, because that interaction between that foreign blood just fucking made the body go fucking haywire. Like,
yeah, I can't imagine your body's just gonna filter that out, no problem. But
yeah, especially this guy's preoccupation with blood. I mean, he must have been jacking himself with a fuck ton of blood for it to like mess him up that bad. Who knows?
Yeah. So, in the Department of News, shocking to no one, he's diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. But like we alluded to earlier, they could only hold him for 72 hours, according to them. I feel like this story would have a very different outcome today.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows? So they release him after 72 hours, release him to his mommy. And I think by now his mom and dad had divorced because it sounds like his dad was like a huge dick.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, you can't really blame him if this is your freak kid. So he goes home to his now single mom, and she thinks it's a really good idea to wean him off his antipsychotic medication and get him his own apartment, which initially he shared with other roommates. And also, not shockingly at all, he scared the fuck out of all of them until they all moved out.
Right.
And yeah, this is the apartment I'm referring to off Watt Ave. If anybody wants to go visit it, you can find the address online. And yeah, so prior to the killing, there was one day in 1977. I couldn't find an exact date, but he rang his mom's doorbell.
Oh yeah.
And when she answered the door, he like pushed a dead cat in her face. And then he threw it on the ground, cut it open, and just started ripping the guts out and eating it. And, normal mother-son stuff. Mom went back inside and didn't report the incident to anybody.
Yeah, that's the thing. I read about multiple instances where they didn't report it or they didn't do anything about it, seemingly. And I mean, this would be I feel like this is the, the grand finale. It's like, if this were to happen in front of you, what would you do as like a rational human? Like if you had a child that did this to you, it's like, dude, this is a huge fucking problem, and she sweeps it under the carpet. That's one thing like that I happened to catch when I was doing the research for this, is that the mom had some mental issues, allegedly, and like she had a really bad bout of like postpartum, like going all the way back to the birth. Like the birth was super complicated, and I read that the husband, who was, I mean, for all intents and purposes, I mean, he was an okay dad. He didn't beat his kid or anything, but he was just like a prick.
Yeah.
And he was very distant, and not like some of the nurses commented, wasn't supportive, like wasn't like doting on his wife who was going through like active labor. And she had like a severe bout of baby blues, of postpartum depression. And it kind of went back and forth over the years, all through like early childhood, adolescent age, like 10, 12. And it hinged on the relationship between the husband and the wife, but because they had their problems. So it seemed like she had like a mood disorder or something, because she kept going in these big swings. Like, she hates this kid. It's like, what did I do with my life, to being like a doting mother and like would shield him and protect him. So I think they're like, that definitely had to play into, at minimum, him being enabled. I mean, right here, like, after being discharged from this institution and then weaned off the antipsychotics, give him ultimate freedom in his own apartment, like, I don't know. Seems like there's way more she could have done to mitigate.
Yeah. I agree with you. And this might be something we could save for a future episode, because I think there's a lot to talk about. But the notion of like criminal liability for the parent. I don't know if you're familiar with Jennifer Crumbly. She is the mom of Ethan Crumbly, who was a school shooter in Michigan a few years ago.
Yeah, I just heard about this. This is like new news, like new legislation, like new interpretations of
Well,
law.
it's not legislation per se, but it's the first time a school shooter's parent has been charged criminally, because they're always charged civilly, like wrongful death, negligence,
Right.
whatever. But this is the first time a parent's been charged criminally, or both parents actually. So maybe
are they treated like the same as like an accessory at this point, or
they are charged with involuntary manslaughter, and
Okay.
what they're saying is they caused the death of these kids through gross negligence, which has its own specific definition. But this would actually fold in nicely with the armorer that's on trial right now in the Rust Alec Baldwin shooting, because it's a similar allegation, which is like, you knew this bad thing was a possibility and you completely ignored it, or you fucking shit the bed and death resulted. So as we record this, the armor on that Rust trial, it's still ongoing. So I'm gonna reserve judgment till the end of that. I mean, so far it looks pretty cooked, because it was her job to secure the guns and the ammo, and a lady died, so obviously she didn't do her job. But but the mom in the school shooter trial, I don't think they proved. I think it was just like the community needed to hang somebody, and I mean the jurors weren't gonna acquit her, and I doubt she'll have any luck on her appeal. Anyway, I think we should do that in a future episode, because it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is. And it's a slippery fucking slope too, man.
I mean, it is, because imagine if you, without getting too far into it, imagine you buy your kid a car and the expectation is your kid is 16. They're not allowed to go drive the car alone, but they can drive it with you. Imagine one day they steal the keys and drive through a fucking farmer's market and kill 4 people.
Right.
Are you now going to jail for 20 years? Anyway, so just as a little preview of a potential future episode. But I mean, yeah, this mom, for sure this should have been foreseeable that this was happening.
Yeah. And let's put it all on her too. You know, the dad's there too, whether they're together or not. I mean, it's his kid too. It's his responsibility. So, I mean, not to like ride the fence or go back on what I was just thinking about, but I mean, this seems like a different scenario because we're glossing over some of the markers or red flags as he grew up. Like I saw one too about like in the 60s when he was younger, like neighbors noticed like a dip in the cat population in a neighborhood.
Yeah.
Like, fuck, you know, like that's, and like finding dead cats in her flower pots and shit out back. Like, I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg with this guy. So I think like the sheer volume of shit should have, I mean, I think it's clear to make that assumption that they could have done more.
Yeah. So we haven't even gotten to the murders yet, and this guy's raising all kinds of red flags. So
I know I keep derailing us.
No, that wasn't you. That was me. So now we're in mid 1977. I couldn't find an exact date. I also didn't look that hard. But so
is this
Ricky,
Pyramid Lake?
Yeah.
This is August 1977.
Okay. So
or Nevada.
Yeah, so he gets stopped and arrested near Pyramid Lake in Nevada, covered in blood, bucket of blood found in his truck.
Wouldn't that be so fucked if you found a liver and a bucket, like a fucking Home Depot 5-gallon bucket of blood?
Yeah,
that's fucking heinous.
Well, and he had some other excuse too. I can't remember what it was. Oh, he said it was his own blood. And they're like, sir, if that were true, you would be dead twice over. Yeah. But then they somehow figured out it was cow's blood, and they're like, all right, well, on your way.
Enjoy your cow blood.
Yeah. All right, so now we get to his first murder. So this is the end of December of 1977. And it seems like this was spurned by... his mom didn't allow him to come home for Christmas. And so he was pretty bent out of shape about it. So he was driving around, similar to where, if we're going to get super local, if those who know where the Costco on Watt Avenue is near Highway 80, right behind there, just driving by, shot a guy in his front yard, no reason. And so December 29th, that was his first one. Oh.
You know what else struck me too is like for the way that he would disembowel cats and like, you know, like with his hands, it's weird that his first killing would be like, I can't remember what like a crime of passion or what kind of murder is this? Like not a spree murder, but I don't know, just maybe like spur of the moment kind of thing. And he does a drive-by for his first killing. And then subsequent, as we'll get into, he kills people just with a handgun, with a .22 pistol. It just seems weird that like I would have thought that, and especially like with the vampire, like he'd be up close and personal, like he'd be strangling and like stabbing, like a slasher type person. So it's weird that it's more of like the more informal, like he's away from them when he's shooting them. It seems like what he was, all of his predispositions, that he'd want to be in the viscera, you know, of all that. But I mean, he does post-mortem, but I mean, like, I guess the method that he takes people out seems odd.
Yeah, I mean, that could go to him actually being an insane person and not somebody who's just like a sick son of a bitch who, you know, and I feel like we would kind of get into like splitting hairs about like, well, what is an insane person versus an evil person versus somebody who wants like the thrill of killing.
Right.
But yeah, it seemed like his first one was just out of like anger and retaliation. And I think maybe he got a taste of it. And I don't know if it was actually a drive-by, because I thought I saw one witness who said he saw a guy on foot. And I will say, if it's a 22, that's a pretty small round. That would probably be tough to kill a guy from the car unless you're pretty proficient, you know?
Yeah, he either got like really lucky or he's a crack shot. And for it to go through something like a 22 bullet to any kind of a structure seems
What do you mean
like
go
it
through
would
a
be
structure?
unlikely.
Oh, like a
From what I found, that he went by and he shot a person in his house, or was this guy in the front yard?
yeah, he was out front unloading groceries.
Oh, okay.
I think what you're referring to is there was a neighbor who was like, "Oh yeah, I saw some fucking weirdo walking around," and he shot into the house down the street, but nobody was hurt, so I didn't call the cops, which is bizarre.
Oh,
but
that's right. Okay. I
something
thought
like
I thought that was the first killing. Like he just shot indiscriminately into someone's house and happened to get him. So this is different. His first killing was the dude was just in his front yard, like watering his fucking lawn.
Yeah, he was
Poor
helping his
bastard.
wife unload some groceries, and she came out and saw him drop. And okay, so then
51-year-old engineer and father of two. You're dead now. It's like,
Yeah.
fuck, man.
For no
such
reason.
such a shit roll of the dice.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, his entire insane crime spree lasted less than a month. So 2 weeks later, he attempted to enter the home of a lady, but her doors were locked. He walked away, and he later told detectives that he took that as a sign that he wasn't welcome, but unlocked doors were an invitation to come in. And and on one occasion, he was chased off by a couple returning home as he went through their shit. And this one is nuts because it was the same night. You know, actually, I'm gonna hold off on the details of this one, but we're gonna put a pin in this one. So January 23rd. Wait. Okay, so yeah, I guess we'll just skip right to it. So January 23rd, 1978. So I guess this is closer to 3 weeks later. There was a break-in, and this was only a block or two from his apartment on Watt Avenue, for those listening in the Sacramento area. Like literally a block to the east. And apparently not far from, well, this says it's not far from where the shooting had occurred, but it was a little ways down the road. So the people who lived in the house were Robert and Barbara Edwards. They were just coming back from shopping. They heard a noise in the house. Robert saw the intruder in the backyard, ran to stop him, but the guy jumped over a fence. And when the Edwards entered their home, they found the house, all fucked up, like somebody was going through it, ransacking it. But then they also found that the intruder had urinated on the baby's clean clothes and defecated on the kid's bed. Classic.
Sick fuck.
Yeah. So then later that same night, January 23rd, Richard Chase broke into a house and shot Teresa Wallen, who was 3 months pregnant, shot her 3 times. He then raped her corpse while stabbing her with a butcher knife. He then removed several organs, cut off one of her nipples, and drank her blood using a yogurt cup as a vessel. He then stuffed dog shit into her throat before leaving.
Yeah, that's fucking brutal, man.
If you think that's brutal, do you want to see a crime scene photo of that?
I don't think I have a choice. I'm so desensitized anyway, it's fine.
All right, so let me...
I don't think anything tops that fucking pit bull eating off that fucking dude's cock and balls, like ripping them off and eating them. Dude.
All right, so this is Teresa Wallen. Can you see that?
Oh my fuck.
Yeah. So remember when I said he cut her nipple out? You see that?
Dude.
And I like they covered her eyes. Like they blacked out her eyes for this picture, which...
Dude, that's fucking heinous, man.
Yeah. And so...
Jesus Christ.
And so she was found like that by her husband, who came home and was like, I think my wife's dead.
Yeah.
And I think she was only like 22, I think.
Yeah, 22.
Super
and she
young.
was 3 months pregnant too.
3 months pregnant.
God, dude. That's so heinous.
Yeah, so that was
like these are the kinds of things that make you want to believe in like retribution or some kind of an afterlife, so that there's
justice.
Yeah, so you don't just get to like, okay, skip out and like that's it. You get one shot, and this person's one shot, they had to go out like that. It's like, dude, there's got to be some fucking scales of justice in the fucking cosmic universe somehow.
Yeah, you would hope. So, a mere 4 days later, if that wasn't satisfying enough for Richard, Mr. Chase found a woman's door unlocked named Evelyn Maroth. And this is the bad one, or also bad. So there were 4 people inside. Evelyn, her 6-year-old son, her 22-month-old nephew, David Ferreira, who she was babysitting, and a friend named Dan Meredith.
Daniel.
So, yeah, it's pretty fucked up. So Chase just
dude, how shitty
door.
is that for the neighbor too? Old Dan, like he just happened to be like checking in and like, hey, and this happens like. Dude.
Oh, was he a neighbor? I thought he was like a dude friend, like a friendly.
Well, yeah, maybe that's just my source. I found it was a neighbor who had come over to check, but maybe they were a little bit more than that. But
well, I think a neighbor came to check, and that's when they found the bodies.
Oh, okay.
But, I mean, maybe it's both. So
either way,
yeah. So Richard encountered Dan in the front hallway, shot him to death immediately. Went into the back room, killed Evelyn and her 6-year-old son, and presumably killed the 22-month-old there, and then panicked, fled. I guess there was a knock at the door. So panicked, fled, took the car keys, Dan Meredith's keys, and the body of David Ferreira, the 22-month-old, left. And it sounds like he left like bloody footprints, handprints, just all kinds of shit all over the house, which they used to later find him with the help of a former high school classmate who was like, hey, I saw that sketch of this psycho, and I actually just ran into him the other day. But
covered in blood.
Yeah, any hope of recovering the child alive, unfortunately, was squelched later when they found him decapitated and mummified in a box behind a church.
Jesus.
Yeah. And he'd been, or maybe it was the 6-year-old. The 6-year-old was shot in the head twice. And Evelyn, she also got the full treatment. Partially cannibalized, stomach cut open, multiple organs missing. There was a failed attempt to remove one of her eyes, apparently, and her corpse was sodomized. And I just have one other thing to show you real quick, totally unrelated to that. This is Evelyn. You see that?
No. You're not doing it right.
You're not doing it right. That's Evelyn.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Pretty bad.
Jesus. I still think the first one was worse for me.
It is, for sure.
God. Also, one point that we didn't highlight at all, which I think is definitely ties to the crux of Mr. Chase's problems and afflictions, was at a very young age, he discovered that he was impotent, and he was, which was a big part of the whole blood thing too. because he learned that the way you get an erection is blood being forced in. So he thought this deficiency in blood, like this imbalance, was why he was impotent and he couldn't get aroused by girls, because by all accounts, like he wasn't like a social outcast or anything. He had a couple girlfriends like in his teenage years, but he couldn't seal the deal because he couldn't get an erection. So he had this like psychosexual preoccupation with the blood and needing to extract blood, and like it became like it seemed like a driving force for him. His sole focus was on this blood dynamic, and then once he started killing, like I think it said like there were multiple ejaculations at this crime scene. Like this is what, so it reinforced his ideas of what he was doing too. So yeah, just a sick motherfucker.
Listen, you sick sack of swill.
Yeah, so when they got turned on to him as a suspect, they found out he lived, within a mile of most of the murder sites, and they waited for him to leave his apartment and took him into custody, and they found a gun, which they say matched everything, and got a butcher knife, boots, animal collars, blenders, which contained blood, and dishes in the refrigerator with body parts, calendars marking today on the dates when he killed people, and yeah, that's when they found the mummified, decapitated body. And
I saw his fridge kind of read like a Jeffrey Dahmer kind of scenario. There was multiple animal parts wrapped in aluminum foil. The 6-year-old boy, David's brains were in a Tupperware container, and pieces of his body wrapped in saran wrap. Some of Evelyn Maroth and Teresa Wallen's internal organs were in there. It's like, Jesus Christ, man. Sounds like something like out of like, you picture like Seven,
yeah,
like them like walking into like some like fucked up grotesque crime scene. It's brutal.
Yeah, and I wish there was more info out there about his trial, because obviously he's went to trial for 6 counts of murder, and the whole like pleading insanity,
the Nazi UFO stuff that he was also preoccupied with, looks like it came up.
Yeah, and it's tricky because like I know there's like popular belief that like, oh, someone can just claim insanity, but it almost never works, because there's 2 parts, like at the time of the crime and then at the time of trial. So if you're insane at the time of the crime and insane at the time of trial, they'll just put you in a mental facility forever, possibly. If
Right.
You're insane at the time of the crime but competent to stand trial, then that's when you can get that sweet spot of not guilty by reason of insanity, where they might just actually let you leave.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, we've talked about it before. Can you imagine how shitty that would be if you weren't an insane person, but they sent you to a mental facility,
Dude,
for an undetermined amount of time?
Yeah, that would be horrible.
Yeah, so they ruled him competent to stand trial, and eventually they ruled him sane at the time of the murders, which, I don't know, the fact that he didn't really try to do anything to cover it up, it was all in his same neighborhood, he saved a bunch of shit from it. It doesn't seem like a sane person, in my opinion.
Yeah, fuck, I don't know. It's tricky. I remember I was looking at something to where that they pointed at that made it seem pretty damning, that there was like forethought and like an understanding that what he did was wrong. I couldn't remember if it was like him leaving or like the fact they pointed at like a piece of evidence that insinuated he was trying to cover something up.
Yeah. Okay.
At this intense like heat of the moment time when you're supposed to be out of your mind, they pointed. I feel like they pointed at something. I can't remember what the fuck it was. That showed, like he knew what he was doing and he was actively trying to cover it up.
Yeah. So let me send you. There's a YouTube clip. It might be easier for you to just play it.
Yeah, you want me to?
Yeah.
Shoot me the link in the message.
So here's the link. So this was from that little miniature weird California's Gold documentary about the trial where I was looking at it like, dude, this guy must be insane. I mean, I don't see any rational person doing this. So to fast forward, they find him guilty and they sentence him to death, and the other prisoners in San Quentin are thoroughly enough freaked out by this guy that they're like, you should probably just kill yourself, dude. And he ends up overdosing on his psychiatric medication. And I was kind of going back and forth, like, I mean, he probably should have been in some kind of, mental institution. But then I saw this clip, and it's like a 30-second clip. It's just like some old guy. I think he must be one of the jurors. And
is it this fella?
Yeah, it's this guy. And based on what he said, I was like, all right, I'm fine with him killing himself, and or even if they just gave him the gas chamber, I don't give a shit.
Oh, bow tie. Okay, it looks like the judge here.
No, not this guy.
This guy?
Yep.
Yeah, that's the same guy. That's the judge.
Oh shit, he looks so much different with glasses.
Yeah, look, because he's wearing a bow tie and his, what do they call that fucking judge smock?
A robe.
Rudes. All right, you want me to play it?
Yep.
There were so many murders in this case. They were so violent and gruesome that even though the defendant mental condition was such that it was thoroughly litigated before the jury, it is a mitigating factor, but I didn't think it outweighed the aggravating factors. And in my mind alone, the murder of the 22-month-old baby in which the defendant decapitated the child, and the circumstances surrounding that murder itself was sufficient to impose the death penalty, aside from the other 5 persons that he killed.
Yeah, so that's pretty much
fucking
it.
A.
Yeah, and it makes sense that that's the judge because, like, do you remember Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland shooting, Florida, also a school shooter?
I don't know the specifics.
It was the Marjorie Taylor or Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, whatever. He killed like 14 people. And I mean, if there was anybody more deserving of the death penalty in Florida, it's the guy who, you have dead to rights.
Right.
But so he was obviously convicted. He pled to all the murders, and then it just went to whether or not this guy's going to get the death penalty. So they're weighing mitigating versus aggravating factors, right? So mitigating would be like, my mom beat me when I was young. I was a fetal alcohol baby. Aggravating would be like, I stood over a person who was already down and shot him again. And it was like especially heinous or cruel or, whatever. So they're always doing this like balancing thing where, yeah, this crime qualifies for the death penalty, but then you have to weigh these factors. So I just like that clip where this guy, apparently the judge, was like, yeah, he had mitigating factors, like he had a shitty life, his brain was probably all scrambled, but sorry, that just doesn't overcome how fucking cruel and awful he was. So
yeah, I mean, there's a certain point where you got to think about like, okay, well, what if this person ever got out into society again?
Yeah.
That's that the public interest outweighs, this guy's life. Fuck that.
Business is business.
Stand on it.
Yeah, one thing we didn't talk about was he did a bunch of interviews with Robert Ressler, who I'm sure most people, if they're into the true crime stuff, they know who he is. The preeminent godfather of criminal profiling for the FBI.
Right.
I've never watched Mindhunter, but it's about him, right?
Yeah, Mindhunter takes him and kind of splits him into 2 people, and there's another guy that they kind of use as like a composite. But in that story, they kind of split his character into two characters for the narrative and for the sake of storytelling. But it basically tells his story, how he started, and he would go. I think the lead detective locally in Sacramento, it was Ray Biondi, and this wrestler guy had done, like, before these murders, he was doing like a countrywide road show where he'd go to different police departments in like major metro areas and, you know, give them the straight dope, like the bleeding edge of profiling and the ways like tracking criminals and classifying them and all that kind of stuff really started to come to the fore. I've heard that, and I don't know. I think he's the wrestler guy. I'd like to know how true to life that is. I know some of the interviews, like the interviews with who's that fucker from Santa Cruz, that big ass dude, Ed, the fuck is his name? The co-ed killer. God,
Kemper.
what is his name? Yeah,
Kemper.
Edmund Kemper.
Yeah.
Like I've heard like all of those, they played really close to like the actual interactions, because I guess, you know, he was super. That's the thing. Some of these criminals, they were pivotal in like you know, sharing inside secrets and like a trip inside the mind.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, it kind of sucks to like. I'm not trying to like lend credence to those fuckers, but I mean, there's a few that through happenstance and like, you know, this guy kind of coming out with this burgeoning FBI profiling science was able to interview these people and glean a lot of stuff that's textbook now for like profiling and how to get in the mind and understand these people. I don't know. It's a weird like gray area. It's kind of like with Will Graham in Manhunter from last week, you know, like how close do you want to get to that flame, you know, of getting inside the mind of a killer?
Yeah, and it's also sort of like a convergence of incentives where you don't want to give these psychopathic people a platform or
something to aspire to or look at,
beneficial to stroke their ego, to learn things. But I also am a little skeptical because you're dealing with psychopaths who the information they're giving you might not necessarily be truthful. They're just self-aggrandizing. So
right.
If you're one of these profilers who I'm dubious about some of these profiler people in general when they try to go too specific. You know, when they're talking about a serial killer and they're like, we think it's a white man between 25 and 35. It's like, well, yeah, they all are, obviously.
Right.
But when they're like, his mom sent him to Boy Scout camp, you know, some of that I just think it's bullshit. And I think they get a lot of that info from, because if you watch these serial killer interviews, there's like a weird chasm where they're either trying to boost their own resume or way undersell it. Like, no, it was just a couple, you know. So it seems like a weird area to try to get a bunch of information, but
yeah, like lots of salt has to be taken.
Yeah,
with all that shit, like try to like really examine it and polish off some of the nuggets and not take it wholesale, because some of those fuckers, they can be super charismatic, like the Edmund Kemper, like all the guards and shit love him, like he had favors like all over the place. Even before he got caught, he like buddied up with cops, like he liked the whole like cop subculture. He was obsessed with like a particular show, and like in the 60s or 70s, and he'd go to like cop bars, he'd seek them out, you know, like part of it is like, stroking their own ego, or they're just like, it's just something that catches their interest, and they're very manipulative, charismatic, you know, like how much of that, you gotta take a lot of salt with that. But it is a weird dance of the mind, like how you're saying, you don't want to give them the platform, and even by like the media's role they play, you know, in naming these killers, like using these different monikers, like that's calling attention to it. So it's like, do you not talk about them at all? But then you don't get to glean any information on how to prevent this in the future. But what if they're both playing into one another? Like, you're giving them the platform.
I guess my my ultimate opinion would be it's better to talk to them than not, because even if they're bullshitting you, you might pick up one or two little things.
Yeah, they'll slip through their own hubris and ego, just like someone in a casino, like overplaying their hand.
Yep. Yeah, it's better
so
than
it's the
than
onus
just
is
not.
on. Yeah, then the onus has to be on. Well, then you got to be super tight about what you release out into the world. Then from that,
Yeah, and it could just be one little thing that seems inconsequential to the killer, where they're talking about how they pick their target. You know, it could be like 2 hours of them talking about how great they are and how justified they are, but there could just be one little nugget where they're like, well, yeah, I look for a house where, you know, there's no husband or whatever. Like one little thing where it's like, oh, that's interesting, that they just sort of, they don't think it's a big deal, but it's a big deal. So I don't know.
Yeah, that Mindhunters, I've recommended it a couple times. It's a really good show. It's good shit. I know I've derailed this a couple times here. Were you getting to anything or a further conclusion on this? I think we spelled it out. He was pushed to suicide. Richard Chase was in jail, so we didn't get to see whether or not the death penalty was upheld, but that's what he was sentenced to, was death.
Yeah, I don't remember
anything
the
else
last time
we skipped over.
I don't remember the last time somebody was actually put to death in California. It's been a really long time.
Yeah, I have no clue. When did we put what do they call it? They put a stay on executions in California. Moratorium. Yeah, was that 2015 they did that?
Yeah, but even before then, I don't think they were doing them. I can't remember. I am going to go out on a limb and say that for me personally, I don't think Richard Chase is a good guy.
No.
Not a good dude.
Welcome to hell, motherfucker!
I hope that's where he went.
I also think just the fact that he killed himself, it shows either a certain level of like guilt, or he just could be that manipulated by the other prisoners who were like, bro, you should just like kill yourself. Because I don't know, I feel like the more like psychopathic or sociopathic, those guys don't kill themselves because they think they're just like one little trick away from getting out or convincing people they didn't do it.
Or they're just going to ride on their infamy the rest of the time they're in there, you know, like.
Did you see there was another little piece of trivia when he was meeting with Wrestler, that when he was asking him about Nazis and UFOs, he asked him for a radar gun so he could apprehend the Nazi UFOs. And that at one point he also handed Wrestler a large amount of mac and cheese, which he'd been hiding in his pants. Thinking that the people in the prison were in league with the Nazis, obviously, and then attempting to kill him with poisoned food. So he gave him the macaroni and cheese to test.
Dude, I'd be like, thanks. Fuck. Let me get some of your tots. Pocket mac and cheese. That sounds, dude, because that's picking up all the grime and dust and lint balls and shit in your pockets. Like, fuck.
Yeah.
A fur burger.
Dead at 30.
Yeah, it's a shame he didn't have to suffer. But yeah, so that was Richard Chase. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we wrap this one up?
No, I don't think so.
Cool. Well, appreciate all the research and the insight and carrying us on this one, Steve-O. Yeah, I'm glad. I mean, I'd heard the name Vampire of Sacramento. I didn't know how depraved this motherfucker was, and he definitely gets overshadowed. I mean, when I was looking at like potential topics for, you know, lesser known serial killers in the state of California, it's a fucking huge, way bigger list than I thought it was going to be. Honestly, like just in the state of California, kind of mind-boggling. And how much just like the few that are in the public consciousness kind of overshadow them is pretty wild. Okay, cool. Looking forward to next week. We didn't pick anything definitive, but I added a couple more movies to the list. What do you feel about like a war movie?
I'm down.
To shift gears. This is one I forgot about and I never added to the list, and I've recommended it a couple times. It's got
Can I guess?
Matt, guess.
The Thin Red Line.
No.
All right.
Have you not seen that?
No.
Really? Wow. Yeah, that is it. It's similar, but like totally different than Saving Private Ryan. It's got like the same kind of aesthetic, like the level of realism, I guess, and like film quality, but they do a hard pivot to like the more philosophical, like esoteric dynamics of war and like the mental side of it. Still very good though. Jim Caviezel is in it. Before he started getting kind of kooky with Passion of the Christ and all that. No, I was thinking of Flamin' Citron. I mentioned it a couple times. Mads Mikkelsen is in it, of Hannibal fame, the TV series. It is a Danish film, so I don't know if there's an English dub out there, so you'll have to do subtitles, but it's on Flamin' Citron is from 2008. It's on AMC Plus, Canopy. Otherwise, it's a rental. Yeah, it's the one about the so Denmark during World War II. A large portion of them got turned or had previous allegiances that got like Manchurian candidated, like turned on, like when the Nazis took power and invaded Poland, they flipped. But there was pockets of resistance in Denmark too that were fed, and they had a conduit between the Scandinavian, mainly Sweden, that were fighting back. And Flamin' Citron are these two like infamous like assassins basically for the Danish resistance to the Nazis. It's fucking sick.
Sounded pretty boring up till then, but
dude, it's awesome. It's yeah, I'm not going to say anymore because I'll let something loose. But yeah, it's really fucking good. If you weren't a Mads Mikkelsen fan before, you guarantee you will when you watch this. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. In the vein, it's like if you did a side story from Saving Private Ryan and followed like a couple like specialists that they like guerrilla like assassin, like you're
all right out, like quit digging, you've already struck oil.
Okay. All right, so let's plan on that for next week, and then just a teaser for the following week. We're gonna have Chris back and Miles as well. We're gonna cover Ricky-O, the story of Ricky, which I'm excited to check out, much to the chagrin of Steve, I think, but It'll be good times had by all nonetheless, I think. So
you ain't a lady if you ain't 180.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us this week. For Richard Chase. If you want to reach out to us, you can do so via email, wax@waxingtheporpoise.com. Hate mail. It's been a minute. Instagram is @waxingtheporpoise. Twitter, X is @waxingtheporp. Any final words?
Looking forward to Chris and Miles. Those guys rule. That movie looks stupid, so
I think it'll be a lot of fun. Alrighty. Well, we'll see you when we see you, and we will see you later.
Oh, please.
Quick addendum, point of order. Dear listener, this is G-Baby. Apologies, but as you may have noticed, if you're an active listener, we skipped a week. I was sick for the whole week and just couldn't get anything done. So Flamin' Citron, which we planned on covering and having come out next, we're bumping, kind of changing places with our episode with Chris and Miles that we have planned to cover Ricky-O, the story of Ricky. So that'll be our next episode after Richard Chase, and the following week after that, we will have Flamin' Citron. That will release on March 28th is when that episode will come out. So thanks for hanging in there with us. Stay tuned. The 21st next week will be Ricky-O, the story of Ricky, featuring friends of the show, Chris and Miles. Ricky-O is kind of hard to find right now. I think it is on the Criterion channel if you have access. Otherwise, I'm going to try and post a link if I can remember. I always say I'm going to, and I never do, so we'll see. But it is available on archive.org for free in English. So yeah, it is out there if you want to watch along ahead of time with us. It should be a lot of fun. So thanks again for hanging in there with us, and we will see you next time. Live fast, eat ass.